Cathari had fought in 17 battles, across 6 star systems, and he had never once considered himself a coward. He was Velocian after all. Born of a warrior species that had conquered half a galaxy before humans had learned to make fire. And his 4 arms had ended more enemies than he cared to count. But, standing in the briefing room of the Coalition flagship, Harmonious Blade, watching the tactical display paint a picture of almost certain death, he felt his skin begin to glow, amber with the fear light that his species could never hide the Harrow. Collective had taken 17 star systems in the past cycle, and they showed no signs of stopping. They were not a species in the traditional sense, but rather a hive mind that consumed other beings and added their biomass to an ever-growing swarm. The images on the display showed worlds stripped bare, civilizations reduced to screaming organic matter, absorbed into the Collective's flesh, and now the Coalition's last fleet stood between the Harrow and the core worlds, where trillions of beings, Live, Ed and Blishat, would become terror. The mission is simple, Admiral Thiessen announced, her Makari tentacles curling with barely concealed anxiety that filled the room with stress pheromones. We must board the Harrow command vessel and destroy the neural nexus that coordinates their fleet in this sector. Simple. Cathari thought bitterly as his skin flashed brighter. Amber, the tactical display, showed their projected casualties at 62%. And that was considered optimistic. The boarding teams would face far worse odds, and everyone in the room knew. I looked around at his fellow warriors and saw fear displayed in a dozen different ways. The Dranathi soldiers trembled so hard their ceremonial armor rattled against their chitinous bodies. The Makari officers leaked so much stress pheromone that the air recyclers struggled to keep up. A group of Theshan commandos had gone completely still, their version of a fear response that made them look like statues, carved from living crystal. And then there were the humans. Cathari's eyes found the small contingent of human soldiers sitting in the corner of the briefing room, and he felt confusion mixed with his fear. There were only 12 of them, a tiny fraction of the assembled force, and they looked almost bored. Some checked their weapons with practiced ease, while others talked quietly among themselves. One of them, a young female with dark skin and close-cropped hair, was actually laughing at something her companion had said. Did they not understand what they were walking into? Did these soft, fragile creatures, with their single pair of arms and their thin skin and their laughably short lifespans, not comprehend that they were about to die? The briefing ended, and the soldiers began to disperse to their assigned positions. Cathari found himself walking toward the human contingent, driven by a curiosity he could not explain. Their leader, a female with gray streaks in her brown hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, noticed his approach and stood to meet him. Commander Elise Vance, she said, extending one of her 2 hands in what Cathari recognized as a human greeting gesture. You must be the Velocian assigned to our strike team. I am Cathari of the 7th Blade, he replied, taking her hand carefully with one of his lower arms, always conscious of his species' superior strength. I have fought in many battles, Commander, but I confess I have never fought alongside humans before. First time for everything, Vance said with a small curve of her lips that humans called a smile. We're glad to have you with us. Cathari glanced at the tactical display, still showing their mission parameters and their projected survival rates. Do your soldiers understand what we face? He asked, lowering his voice. I mean no disrespect, but they seem very calm for warriors about to undertake a mission with such low survival probability. Vance followed his gaze to her squad, where the dark-skinned female, who had been laughing, was now arm wrestling with a massive male soldier, while others placed bets. They understand, Vance said quietly. Probably better than anyone else on this ship. And why do they not show fear? Cathari pressed. his own skin still glowing with amber light he could not suppress. "Are humans incapable of feeling terror?" Vance laughed, a short sound that held no mockery. "Oh, we feel it all right," she said. "Torres over there, the one who just won that arm wrestling match. She has a daughter back on Earth who just turned 6. And Chun, the medic, he's getting married next month if we survive this. And Kowalski, the big one, he has nightmares every night about the last boarding action where he lost half his squad." She turned to face Cathari directly, and he was struck by the intensity in her strange alien eyes. "We are all terrified, Cathari of the Seventh Blade, and we know exactly what is waiting for us on that ship. But humans learned a long time ago that fear does not go away just because you want it to. So instead, we learn to carry it with us and keep moving anyway." Cathari did not know what to say to that in Velocian culture. Fear was something to be conquered or hidden, a weakness that marked you as unfit for battle. The idea of simply accepting fear and fighting despite it was almost incomprehensible to him. "The shuttles launch in 1 hour," Vance said, turning back toward her squad. "Get your gear and meet us at Docking Bay 7. She paused and looked back at him over her shoulder. "And Cathari, that glow on your skin, on my world, we would call that honest. And there is no shame in being honest about what we face. So you will fit in fine with us." Cathari watched her walk away and felt something strange stirring in his chest. He had expected the humans to be weak, to be a liability in the coming battle, to be the soft underbelly of their strike team that he would need to protect. But there was something in the way Vance had spoken, something in the quiet confidence of her soldiers that made him reconsider these humans knew they were probably going to die, and they were making jokes about it. Not because they did not understand death, but because they had made peace with its possibility an hour later. Cathari stood in Docking Bay 7 with his weapons checked and his armor sealed and his skin still glowing with fear light that marked him as terrified. The human squad was there already. And Torres, the one with the daughter back home, caught his eye and nodded at him. "Stick close to us in there," she said, her voice calm and steady. "We look out for our own, and you are one of us now. One of us." Cathari thought as the shuttle bay doors opened and the assault craft powered up their engines. He had killed enemies on a dozen worlds, and he had never once felt like he belonged anywhere except on the battlefield. But something about the way these humans faced their own extinction made him want to understand them better. The shuttle lurched into motion and Cathari grabbed a support strut with 2 of his arms, while the humans strapped themselves into their seats with practiced efficiency. Commander Vance sat across from him, and when their eyes met, she gave him another of those small human smiles. "First time fighting with humans," she said over the roar of the engines. "Do not worry, Cathari. We know exactly what we are walking into. And that is precisely why we are the ones you want beside you when everything goes wrong." The shuttle screamed out into the void toward the massive organic bulk of the Harrow command ship, and Cathari felt his fear burning brighter than ever. But for the first time in his long warrior's life, he also felt something else. He felt curious about what these strange, calm humans would show him in the hours to come. The shuttle ride to the Harrow command ship was the longest 20 minutes of Cathari's life into ship. Fire lit up the void around them like a storm of burning stars, and the pilot threw their craft into maneuvers that would have torn apart any vessel not designed for combat insertion. Through the small viewport, Cathari watched another shuttle take a direct hit and vanish in a bloom of fire and shrapnel. 30 soldiers gone in an instant. Their fear and their courage and their hopes for survival erased in a flash of light. His skin blazed so bright with amber terrorlight that he could see it reflecting off the walls of the shuttle. Interior, the Dranathi soldier beside Him was shaking so hard, his mandibles clicked. Together in a constant rhythm of panic, the Makari across the aisle had gone catatonic. Her tentacles limp and her eyes vacant with overwhelming dread. But the humans sat steady in their restraints, and their faces showed tension but not collapse. Torres had her eyes closed and her lips moved silently in what Kethari later learned was something humans called Pre-Kowalski. The big one was checking his weapon for the third time, his massive hands steady despite what must have been raging fear within Chen. The medic was reviewing something on a small screen. Medical protocols, perhaps? Or maybe pictures of the person he hoped to marry. Commander Vance caught Kethari staring at her soldiers, and she leaned forward against her restraints to speak over the noise. "The first time is always the hardest," she said. "After that you learn that panic does not help. So you find other ways to spend the time." "How can you be so calm?" Kethari demanded, his voice cracking in a way that shamed him. "I am not calm," Vance replied with that strange human honesty. "I am controlled, and there is a difference. And it took me 20 years of training in combat to learn it." The shuttle shuddered as something exploded nearby, and then the pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing breach in 30 seconds. The humans moved like a single organism, releasing their restraints and forming up at the assault door with weapons ready. Kethari forced his forearms to obey him and took his position among them, trying to ignore the way his skin painted the whole squad in amber light. "Stay close to me," Torres said from his left. "When we hit the breach zone, it is going to be chaos. But just keep moving and keep shooting, and we will get through it together." The shuttle slammed into the side of the Harrow command ship, and the assault door blew open and hell swallowed them. Holy Kethari had seen combat before, but nothing had prepared him for the inside of a Harrow vessel. Walls were not metal but living tissue that pulsed and writhed with obscene organic rhythms. The air was thick with a smell like rotting meat and chemical waste that made his secondary lungs burn with every breath, and everywhere, emerging from openings in the walls and dropping from the ceiling and crawling up from beneath floor panels, came the Harrow drones. They were nightmares given form, each one different from the last, assembled from the stolen bodies of a dozen consumed species and twisted into weapons of chitin and claw and dripping. Kethari opened fire with all four arms, his plasma rifles screening death into the swarm. But for every drone that fell, two more took its place. Contact left. Vance's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear as a bell. "Kowalski, suppress that corridor. Torres and Chun, advance on my mark. Kethari, cover our six." The humans moved with terrifying precision, their calls and responses forming a rhythm that somehow made sense of the madness. Kethari found himself falling into their pattern, his warrior instincts recognizing the genius of their coordination. A Harrow drone lunged at him from the shadows, and he put two plasma bolts through its twisted skull, then spun to cover Torres as she advanced up the corridor. "Good shooting," she called back to him. And despite everything, he felt a surge of pride at the humans' approval. They pushed deeper into the ship, leaving a trail of burning drone corpses behind them. The Dranathi soldier who had been shaking on the shuttle fought beside them with desperate courage, his fear transformed into furious action by the example of the humans around him. But then, something happened that Kethari had feared from the moment they breached the hull. The Makari officer who had gone catatonic on the shuttle suddenly screamed and broke formation, running blindly down a side corridor away from a wave of advancing drones. "No!" Vance shouted. But it was Kowalski who moved the big human through himself after the panicking Makari without hesitation, tackling her to the ground just as a Harrow drone's blade arm swept through the space where her head had been. Kowalski took the follow-up blow across his back, the blade slicing through his armor and into the flesh beneath. But he did not let go of the Makari instead. He rolled them both behind cover and came up firing. His face twisted with pain, but his hand still steady on his weapon. "Kowalski is hit," Chung called out, already moving toward the wounded human. "Keep pushing." Kowalski growled through gritted teeth. "It is just a scratch. I have had worse from my ex-wife." The other humans laughed. Actually laughed in the middle of a corridor full of alien horrors. And Ketheri felt something shift inside him. These beings were not fearless. Not at all. He could see Therese's hands trembling as she reloaded her weapon. He could hear the tightness in Vance's voice as she called out orders. He could smell the stress sweat soaking through Chun's uniform as he worked on Kowalski's wound. They were terrified, every single one of them. But they had learned to function within their terror like fish swimming through water. They did not fight against their fear or try to suppress it or pretend it did not exist. They simply acknowledged it and then chose to act anyway, turning their bodies' alarm signals into fuel for their determination. Rather than chains around their will, the team reached a junction where 3 corridors met and Vance called a halt to check their position. Ketheri's tactical display showed they were barely halfway to the neural nexus at the heart of the ship. The map also showed movement on all sides. Harrow reinforcements converging on their position from every direction. "We have company coming," Vance announced, studying her own display with those strange storm gray eyes. "How much company?" Torres asked. "All of it." "Looks like..." The humans exchanged glances, and Ketheri waited for the despair to set in, for the realization of their impossible odds to finally break their composure. Instead, Vance smiled. That small curve of lips that seemed to mean something different every time Ketheri saw it. "Good," she said. "That means we are close to something important. Because they would not be throwing this much at us if we were not a threat." She looked around at her squad, at the wounded Kowalski and the still shaking Makari and the amber glowing Velocian who had never felt so out of his depth. "The core is 2 kilometers that way," she said, pointing down the largest corridor. "We move fast, we hit hard, and we do not stop for anything. Because if we die here, then at least we die moving forward." "Ura," the humans responded in unison. A sound that Ketheri did not understand, but whose meaning was unmistakable. They believed not in victory, not in survival, but in the act of fighting itself. They believed that the attempt mattered, even if the outcome was death. And, for the first time since boarding that shuttle, Ketheri felt his fear begin to change into something else. It was still terror. Still the amber light blazing across his skin. But now it burned alongside something new. It burned alongside the desperate, defiant hope that these strange, calm humans had somehow ignited in his warrior's heart. The deeper they pushed into the Harrow command ship, the worse everything became. The corridors grew tighter, the organic walls pressing in like the throat of some vast beast, swallowing them whole. The lights, such as they were, flickered and failed as damaged systems throughout the vessel began to collapse, and the Harrow kept coming. Wave after endless wave of twisted horrors that seemed to multiply with every step the team took. They lost the first Velocian at the second junction. A warrior named Sefek, who had fought beside Ketheri in 3 previous campaigns, a Harrow lurker, had emerged from the wall itself. Its body somehow merged with the ship's living tissue. And Sefik had been dead before anyone could react. Ketheri watched his fellow warrior fall and felt his fear light blaze even brighter. Shifting from amber toward the yellow-white of true terror, 2 more Velocians fell at the ambush point, caught in a crossfire from drones that had somehow flanked their position. The Makari that Kowalski had saved finally succumbed to her wounds, dying quietly while Chun tried desperately to save her. Their strike team was being whittled down with every meter of ground they gained. Ketheri found himself fighting on automatic. his forearms moving in patterns drilled into him since childhood. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was watching himself die over and over. In every possible way this mission could end, Cathari. The voice cut through his spiral of despair, and he realized he had stopped moving, was crouched behind a twisted growth of organic material. His weapons hanging limp in his hands, his entire body blazing, so bright with terrorlight that he might as well have been a targeting beacon for every drone in the sector. Commander Vance was beside him, having somehow crossed the corridor without being hit, and her hand was on his upper right arm. "Look at me," she said, and her voice was calm, impossibly calm. Like still water in the middle of a hurricane. Cathari looked. "I know what you're feeling right now," Vance said. "Your mind is showing you all the ways you could die, and it will not stop because that is what minds do when they are terrified." "How do you know that?" Cathari managed to say. "Because I feel the same thing," Vance replied. "Every single time, and I have been doing this for 23 years. She settled into cover beside him while plasma bolts screamed overhead, and the sounds of combat filled the corridor. "Let me tell you about my grandmother," she said. Cathari stared at her, convinced the human had lost her mind. "Your grandmother," he repeated. "We are in the middle of a battle." "Exactly," Vance said, "which is why you need to listen. Because when I was a little girl, my grandmother had a garden behind her house in a place called Vermont, and every summer I would visit her and help her tend it." She paused to fire 3 precise shots down the corridor, dropping a drone that had gotten too close. Then continued as if nothing had happened. "She grew tomatoes and peppers and beans, and these beautiful sunflowers that were taller than I was. And every morning we would walk through the rows together and check on everything and pull weeds and talk about nothing important at all." "Why are you telling me this?" Cathari demanded. But he noticed that his breathing had slowed and his light had dimmed slightly from white toward amber. "Because that garden is where I go when things get bad," Vance said. "Inside my head, I mean, and when I am terrified and my body wants to freeze or run or give up, I think about the smell of tomato plants in the morning sun, and the sound of my grandmother humming while she worked, and the feel of cool dirt under my bare feet." She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes that had seen so much death. "Do you have a place like that?" "Cathari, somewhere you felt safe, somewhere you felt at peace." He thought about it despite himself, casting back through his long memory to find something that matched what she described. "The crystal caves of Veloz Prime," he said slowly, "where the light comes through the formations and breaks into 1,000 colors. And I would sit there as a child and watch the pattern shift as the sun moved across the sky." "Hold on to that," Vance said. "When the fear gets too loud, go there in your mind. Not to escape, but to remind yourself that there are things worth surviving for." She showed him her hand, holding it out in front of his face, and Cathari saw that it was trembling violently. "I'm terrified," she said simply. "I have been terrified since we boarded this shuttle. But fear is information, not instruction. And it tells me where the danger is, but it does not get to decide what I do about it." "How?" Cathari asked. "How do you do that?" "Practice," Vance said with that small smile. "And stubbornness. And the knowledge that my people did not claw their way from caves to starships by giving in to fear. Because we evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived by being too stubborn to stop moving." She rose from cover and extended her hand to him. "Your ancestors conquered half a galaxy," she said. "Mine barely made it off their own planet without killing themselves a dozen times over. But we are both here now, fighting the same enemy, and I would be honored to have you beside me when we finish this." Cathari took her hand with one of his and pulled himself up. The fear was still there, blazing across his skin, but something had changed in the way he felt it. It was not a weight anymore, not a chain holding him in place. It was fuel, burning hot and bright. and he could choose where to direct it. The core, he said. How much further? Half a kilometer, Vance replied. And Chun has confirmed that the neural nexus is definitely there, along with something big that is guarding it. How big? Big enough that we lost contact with 2 other strike teams that tried to reach it from different entry points. Kethari felt the fear spike again, but this time he did not let it freeze him. He thought of crystal caves and colored light and the feeling of peace that he had almost forgotten existed then. He raised his weapons and checked his ammunition and turned to face the corridor ahead. Then we should hurry, he said, before whatever is guarding the nexus finishes with the others and comes looking for us. Vance nodded and signaled the team to move out as they advanced. Kethari found himself watching the humans with new eyes. He saw Chun treating a wounded Dronathi while plasma fire scorched the wall behind him. The medic's hands steady despite the chaos around him. He saw Kowalski fighting through his wound, blood soaking through his field bandage, refusing to slow down even though every step must have been agony. Saw Torres leading the point team with a calm that Kethari now understood was not lack of feeling, but mastery of it. These humans had weaponized their own composure, turned emotional regulation into a tactical advantage that no other species had achieved. They were not stronger or faster or more durable than the other beings in the coalition, but they could function under pressures that would break anyone else, could keep thinking and fighting and cooperating when terror should have reduced them to animals. And now Kethari understood why the galaxy both feared and respected these strange creatures from a small blue world on the edge of known space. It was not their technology or their numbers or even their legendary stubbornness. It was this ability to be terrified and still choose to move forward, to acknowledge the darkness and walk into it anyways. Team reached the outer chamber of the neural nexus, and Kethari finally saw what had destroyed the other strike teams. A Harrow Prime stood in the center of the room. 20 feet of armored nightmare made from the combined bodies of 100 different species. It turned toward them, and Kethari's fear light blazed white, but he did not run. The Harrow Prime was unlike anything Kethari had ever faced in his long career as a warrior. Stood in the center of the chamber like a god of death made flesh, its body assembled from the consumed remains of species that had once been proud civilizations. He could see pieces of Dronathi chitin forming armor plates across its torso and Makari tentacles repurposed into grasping appendages, and even what looked like Velocian war claws grafted onto its massive arms. But worst of all were the faces scattered across its body like trophies with the preserved faces of those it had killed, their expressions frozen in eternal terror, their eyes somehow still seeming to track movement as if some part of them remained aware the neural nexus pulsed behind it. A massive organic structure that looked like a brain the size of a small building. And Kethari understood that destroying it would cripple the Harrow fleet in this entire sector. He also understood that the Harrow Prime was not going to let that happen. Spread out, Commander Vance ordered, her voice tight but controlled. Hit it from multiple angles. And keep moving, because if it focuses on any one of us, we are dead. The team scattered like seeds in a wind, and the battle began. I had never fought anything that moved so fast despite its massive size. The Harrow Prime crossed the chamber in 2 strides and swatted aside a Dronathi soldier like an insect, sending the broken body crashing into the far wall. It spun and caught Torres with a backhand blow that would have killed her instantly if Kowalski had not tackled her aside at the last second. Both humans went down hard, but they were already rolling, already moving, already coming up with weapons blazing. Concentrate fire on the joints, Chun shouted, and the team shifted their aim, pouring plasma and kinetic rounds into the creature's elbows and knees and the places where Stolen body parts had been grafted together. The Harrow Prime roared, a sound that was somehow made up of 100 different screams in 100 different languages. And it swept its arm across the chamber in a wide arc. 3 soldiers died in that single blow. Their bodies broken and thrown aside like discarded toy scattery. Felt his terror spike to levels he had not known existed. His entire body was blazing white now, so bright that it hurt to look at, and he knew that meant his heart was close to giving out from pure fear, but he did not stop fighting. Thought of crystal caves and colored light. And he kept pulling his triggers and kept moving and kept refusing to give in. Torres was at his side suddenly, her human face twisted with determination and grief. "Cover me," she shouted. "I have an idea." She pulled something from her belt. A grenade that Kethari recognized as a shaped charge designed for breaching armored hulls. And she began moving toward the Harrow Prime. "Torres, no," Vance shouted. But Torres was already committed. She ran straight at the creature while the rest of the team poured fire into its face and chest, trying to blind it, trying to slow it down, trying to give Torres the second she needed. The Harrow Prime saw her coming and raised one massive arm to strike a Kethari, watched in horror as the arm descended. Knowing Torres was about to die, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. But Torres did not try to dodge. Instead, she jumped, launching herself upward with all the strength in her human legs. And she hit the Harrow Prime's weapon arm just above the elbow joint. The grenade locked onto the arm with magnetic clamps, and Torres used the last of her momentum to push herself clear. She almost made it. The Harrow Prime's other arm caught her in midair, claws punching through her armor and into her body. And Kethari heard her cry out in pain, but her thumb was already pressing the detonator. The shaped charge exploded, and the Harrow Prime's weapon arm blew apart in a shower of stolen flesh and twisted. Chitin Torres fell to the ground, and she did not get up for a moment. The entire chamber seemed to freeze. Kethari stared at Torres's crumpled form and felt something break inside him. Something that he had not even known he possessed. He had known this human for only a few hours, but she had saved his life twice. And she had a daughter waiting for her back on Earth, and now she was lying motionless in a pool of her own blood. The human's composure cracked. Kethari saw it happen, saw the calm that had carried them through the impossible suddenly shatter like glass. And what emerged from behind it was not despair, it was rage. "Chun, get to Torres," Vance commanded. And her voice was different now, harder, colder, like steel being drawn from a forge. "Everyone else, we finish this." The team attacked with renewed fury, their grief and anger channeled into devastating focus. Kowalski screamed something in a human language that Kethari did not understand and charged the Harrow Prime with nothing but a combat knife, somehow dodging its remaining arm and burying the blade in one of its many stolen faces. The creature howled and tried to shake him off, but Kowalski held on with both hands, twisting the knife, tearing, destroying. Kethari found himself moving without conscious thought, all 4 arms firing in perfect coordination. His fear transformed into something else entirely. He was not fighting despite his terror anymore. He was fighting with it, using it, letting it fuel him rather than freeze him. The Harrow Prime was wounded now, ichor leaking from a dozen holes, its movements slowing as the damage accumulated, but it was still deadly, still powerful, still blocking the path to the neural nexus. "Someone has to plant the charge," Vance said. And Kethari heard the terrible truth in her voice. "Someone has to get past it and reach the nexus while the rest of us keep it occupied." "I will go," Kethari said immediately. "No," Vance replied. "You are our best shooter, and we need you to keep that thing busy." She pulled a package from her tactical vest. The neural disruptor charge that would destroy the nexus and cripple the Harrow fleet. "I am going," she said. And it was not a suggestion or a request. It was simply a statement of fact. "Commander," Kowalski started to protest. But Vance cut him off. "Torres bought us an opening," she said, looking at the wound in the Harrow Prime, where its weapon arm used to be. "I am not going to waste it." She looked around at her surviving soldiers and at Cathari, and she smiled that small human smile one last time. "It has been an honor," she said. "Now keep that thing busy." She started moving toward the Nexus, staying low. Using the chaos of the battle as cover, Cathari watched her go and felt something shift inside him again. His skin was still blazing white with terror, but now that terror had a purpose, a direction, a meaning. He had to keep the Harrow Prime focused on him long enough for Vance to reach the Nexus. He had to be terrifying enough to make a nightmare pay attention. Stepped out of cover and raised all four arms and opened fire directly into the creature's face while screaming a Velocian war cry that echoed off the chamber walls. The Harrow Prime turned toward him, and Cathari saw his own death reflected in its countless stolen eyes. But behind the creature, moving through the shadows with that strange human calm, "Commander." Vance was getting closer to the Nexus, and Cathari realized that he finally understood what these humans had been trying to teach him all along. Fear was not the enemy. It never had been. The enemy was surrender. The willingness to let terror make your choices for you. The acceptance that death was something to be avoided at any cost. The humans had learned to die well, to die fighting, to die moving forward, and as the Harrow Prime raised its remaining arm to strike him down, Cathari discovered that he had learned it too. The Harrow Prime's arm descended toward Cathari like the hammer of an angry god, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was about to die, but he did not close his eyes. And he did not try to run, and he did not stop firing. If these were his last moments, then he would spend them fighting. Just as the humans had taught him, the blow never landed. Kowalski hit the Harrow Prime from the side at the last possible second, driving his combat knife into the joint of its remaining arm and disrupting its swing just enough that the massive claws passed over Cathari's head instead of through it. Creatures screamed and turned on Kowalski, forgetting Cathari entirely, and the big human went down under a storm of savage blows. "Kowalski!" Chun screamed, abandoning his position by Torres's body to rush toward his fallen comrade. Cathari did not think about what he did next. He simply moved, all four arms blazing with weapons fire, his white terror light burning so bright that it seemed to fill the entire chamber. He charged straight at the Harrow Prime while screaming in Velocian, words that he had not spoken since he was a child, the ancient battle hymns of his people that praised courage and defiance and the glory of dying well. The creature turned toward him, and Cathari saw Commander Vance finally reach the neural nexus. She was pinned down behind a seance growth of organic material just meters from her target. Harrow drones converging on her position, but she was still alive and still moving. Cathari threw himself at the Harrow Prime with all four arms outstretched, not trying to kill it, not trying to wound it, just trying to keep its attention focused on him for a few more seconds. He hit the creature like a small moon hitting a planet and felt bones crack in at least two of his arms, but his momentum carried him upward, climbing the nightmare's body, and he found himself face to face with its central mass, where 100 stolen faces screamed in eternal agony. "Remember me," he snarled, and he shoved two of his plasma rifles directly into the creature's main sensory cluster and pulled the triggers. The Harrow Prime threw him off with a roar that shook the chamber walls, and Cathari flew through the air and hit the ground hard enough to crack his armor in 3 places. But the creature was blind now, thrashing and screaming and striking at shadows. And through his pain, Cathari saw Commander Vance plant the charge on the neural nexus. "Fire in the hole!" she shouted. the ancient human warning for an imminent explosion. And then the world turned white. The neural nexus detonated in a cascade of psionic energy that tore through the Harrow command ship like lightning through water. The Harrow Prime collapsed as if its strings had been cut, its stolen bodies falling apart as the hive mind connection that held them together was severed. Throughout the ship, throughout the entire Harrow fleet, drones and warriors and beasts suddenly went still as the coordinating intelligence that guided them fell silent. The battle was over. They had won. Cathari lay on his back, staring at the ceiling of the chamber and tried to remember how to breathe. Every part of his body hurt, and at least 2 of his arms were broken, and his tarot light had finally faded to a dull amber glow that felt almost peaceful. He heard footsteps approaching, and then Commander Vance was kneeling beside him, her face covered in blood and dirt, and the gray streaks in her hair matted with Harrow ichor. "You are insane," she said, and she was smiling. "Charging a Harrow Prime like that. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about crystal caves," Cathari replied. "And about not surrendering." Vance laughed, a real laugh this time, full and warm and tired. "Torres is alive," she said. "Barely, but Chun thinks she will make it, and Kowalski too. Though he is going to have some new scars to brag about." "We survived," Cathari said, and the words felt strange in his mouth, like something he had not expected to say. "We survived," Vance agreed. "Thanks to you." The extraction team found them an hour later, pulling the survivors out of the dying Harrow ship and onto shuttles that carried them back to the Harmonious Blade. Of the original strike team, only 5 had survived. Cathari, Commander Vance, the badly wounded Torres, the even more badly wounded Kowalski, and Chun, who had somehow come through without a scratch despite spending the entire battle running from one dying soldier to another. But the neural nexus was destroyed, and the Harrow fleet in this sector had been crippled, and the core worlds were safe for now. It was a victory, bought with blood and terror, and the strange human calm that had made it possible. Cathari spent 3 days in the medical bay while his bones were regrown and his organs were repaired. On the 4th day, Commander Vance came to visit him. She sat beside his bed in silence for a long time, just watching him, and Cathari found that he did not mind the quiet. Finally, she spoke. "There is something I want to teach you," she said. "If you are willing to learn more lessons about fear," Cathari asked. "No," Vance replied. "This is something different." She began to hum a simple melody that rose and fell like breathing, like waves on a shore, like the gentle shifting of light through crystal caves. "What is that?" Cathari asked. "A lullaby," Vance said. "My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was afraid of the dark. And human children need songs like this, because we are born knowing that the universe is full of things that want to hurt us. So we learn early that courage is something you practice. Like music, like fighting, like breathing." She taught him the words. Simple human words about stars and sleeping and being safe. And Cathari found himself humming along despite not understanding why. "I felt terror for the first time fighting beside you," he said when the song was done. "Good," Vance replied. "That means you were paying attention." She stood to leave but paused at the door. "The coalition is putting together a new unit," she said. "Mixed species, humans and Velocians and anyone else willing to learn how to fight like we do. And I am being asked to lead it." She looked back at him with those storm gray eyes. "I could use a warrior who is not afraid to glow white." Cathari thought about everything he had experienced since boarding that shuttle. The fear and the chaos and the death and the terrible, beautiful way these humans had taught him to carry terror like a weapon instead of a wound. "I would be honored," he said. Vance nodded and left. And Cathari lay back in his bed and thought about what he had learned. He had always believed that courage was the absence of fear, that true warriors felt nothing when they faced death, that the amber glow of his terror light was a mark of weakness that shamed his species. The humans had shown him how wrong he was. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Not the silence of a calm mind, but the discipline of a terrified one choosing to act anyway. The humans had spread across the galaxy, not because they were stronger or braver than other species, but because they had learned something that no one else had. They had learned that fear was not the enemy surrender. Was the enemy giving in was the enemy. The belief that terror should stop you from doing what needed to be done was the enemy, and humanity never surrendered. Not to their enemies, not to the void, and not to the fear in their own hearts. Cathari closed his eyes and hummed the lullaby that Commander Vance had taught him. The simple human song about being brave in the dark. He had felt terror for the first time fighting alongside humanity's calm, and he had learned that terror was not something to be conquered or hidden. It was something to be carried. Like a weapon, like a burden, like a song, and he was proud to have stood beside those strange, calm humans who had taught him to stand. He was prouder still that he had learned